Welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Lead the Future, an unedited, honest conversation to change the conversation and create the future. I'm Arjan Visser, human centered futurist, and your host today. And join me as I chat with my friend Chris Harding about authentic leadership transformation. Chris is a game changer to the core, driven by relentless curiosity to see beneath the surface and reimagine what's truly possible in this grand adventure we call life. Chris, thank you for making room in your planning for this podcast. I
Always
asked already so much time last week.
not a problem. Always good to talk to you.
We had a great week when we had, or actually, it's already 2 weeks ago when we had our first ever Alt Summit, Authentic Leadership Transformation, short Alt, and we launched the Alt Forum. And how did you, I would nearly say recover, but also look back? How do you look back, reflect on that crazy high intensive week?
Well, it was very deep and very wide in terms of conversations, and it's. I mean, it really got me thinking, particularly about even just the words authentic leadership, right? And because it seemed to me that there were some people in the room who were looking for tactics and looking for a skills upgrade, as if authentic leadership is a style. And you very clearly said it's not a style. And it kind of, I thought, oh, this is really interesting, because I was thinking something different, and I wondered, why was I thinking something different? How do I put language to that? And so I went and revisited. Do you remember we talked about leadership a couple of podcasts ago, where I discovered that the original word for leader has this connotation of bringing forth into existence.
Yeah, I remember.
Right. There's an implicit idea that a leader is someone of vision. And their leading is not going out front necessarily, other than they're out front in that they see more clearly what's possible and they're bringing it into existence. And we've talked a number of times about the difference between leaders and managers. There's lots of managers around. But as I was digging a little bit deeper than that, there's also a sense in which this leader who's bringing forth this vision into reality carries something. And that really resonated when I went to look at the origins of the word authentic, which is about becoming a master, like a Eastern master of something. And there's this one phrase which says, as someone who carries their own authority in that thing. And therefore, I think there is a risk that authentic leadership becomes just this virtue signal. Oh yeah, I'm an authentic leader. What does that even mean? If you really look below the surface, it means an authentic leader is someone who is stepping into the fullness of who they are meant to be, who they are wired to be, who they are here to be, and working out what is the good I'm bringing into the world.
Yeah.
And that is so, for me, that is so much more exciting and energizing. Because I think that's the journey I've been on. And the thing is, and I don't know if that's the journey I've been on just because of the stage of life I'm at, or whether that's something that a journey everybody can be on.
I think it's a bit of both, and actually more dimensions to that. It has to do with the time we live in.
Yeah.
Because of 50 years ago, when we entered, and you were one of the panelists in when we talked about the creative age is now.
Yeah.
The creative age started a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we looked to rhythms, routines through the ages. We also mentioned that, well, it's not that it starts on day one of the new year. No. There's a crossover between ages that some calculate to 10 years on both ends of that date. So
Yeah.
50 years can be 30 years, and the next 50 years can be 70 years, And
Yeah.
at the end, that doesn't matter. But do you sense the time you live in? Do you sense the stage of life you have entered? Because more than 50 years ago, post Second World War, it was buckle up, suck up. And so that it was not the age where things that you just mentioned about bringing the new, pioneering the new, figuring out who you are created to be. No, it was just, we need your hands, your shoulders, and your gold. We need to rebuild the land.
Mm.
The last 50 years was all about productivity, increased efficiency, and everyone who had an understanding of their personal calling and personal desires uh, had to survive outside of the system. And now we're entering an age where actually that's the core of reinvention, innovation, humanity happened before in society.
Yeah.
So and and when you are in the life stage where things happen for you and you're transitioning to the, let's call it, the second part of life, which is a bit weird because when we can divide it in four phases, seven, whatever. But let's just take the classical black and white perspective. At the beginning of the second part of life, it's all about why am I here?
Mm.
Let's make use of the rest of time to unfold and fulfill my calling, my purpose, my desires, my deep intentions, my blueprint. So I think it's more like a match
Right.
of your journey and the time we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was very interesting to unpack that 50-year thing and to think about standing at the like the threshold or the interplay between the old mechanistic age and this new creative age, which lots of people are just calling the fourth industrial revolution, particularly the industrialists, right?
Yeah.
And even if you look at the language of the era that I kind of grew up in, if you like, it's so it is so mechanistic, even language like human resources,
Yeah.
which then they change to human capital as if that makes it any better. It's just
I always try to just to push it a bit to human relationships, and then someone else woke me up by saying, "Oh, but we still deal with it as human remains." It's so yeah. That is the thing. But like you said, the fourth industrial age, that's by the rulers who took over from the generations of rulers.
yeah.
That is not fitting the same galaxy of reinventing leadership and leading from the inside out. That is just extending a more than a 200-year-old paradigm or 150-year-old into, but that is the opposing sound bite we hear all around. We
Yeah,
call it singularity. When big tech and human being gets more close to it, and we get. I don't even want to imagine what machine and human together will be, I get these flashbacks when I was a teenager and we had this Mad Max movie series. That's what I see, like metaphor images when I think about that. But when I think of Renaissance, flourishing, true innovation, then I think back of what led to golden ages in societies.
Yeah, and look, I've been paying attention to this for quite a long time, and there are lots of voices emerging and communities emerging where people are saying uh, more of the same is not good, right? Because the only way to go for more of the same is by giving fewer people more power.
Yeah.
And people are inherently selfish, and so giving fewer people more power so that they can spin to you ideas about why having a chip in your brain. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but the singularity of machines and humans coming together and how awesome that would be. Yeah, it's easy to find a great way to spin that, but yeah, for those who want power, who are driven by power, they will very quickly abuse that, and that wouldn't be a good thing. But there are voices emerging. I mean, I don't know if you saw anything of the ARC conference, which was about reimagining civilization for the next 100 years. Some very interesting people speaking about the fundamental underlying principles of our humanity is that we need to give ourselves away, not hoard more power, but a lot of the stuff you're talking about in terms of the authentic leadership forum about how do I discover who I am and why I'm here, and who I am as a gift to be good news in the world. That is a discovery process. It's an awakening process. It's a stepping up process to want to lean into that, to work out, okay, what am I here to give? Because some of these old wisdoms that we think we've somehow surpassed are actually still true. When I work out who I am and how I'm here to give, it is in giving that I receive the fullness of all I've ever been looking for.
Yeah.
When my life has meaning because it makes a difference in the world, and even in the smallest circles, like to my partner, to my family, to my friends, to my neighborhood, like those are the first testing grounds, aren't they? Not trying to fix it or expect someone else to fix it, but to choose to, I'm gonna be the best that I can be. And I loved what David was talking about then, because that's the other dimension of it then, because that is the thing that seems to be missing, is everybody taking responsibility for working out who is the best me and how am I going to be that from the inside out.
Yeah, and I think that goes hand in hand with owning who you are, because it's a responsibility to work it out, but you can only work out where you have ownership over, or else we are back with the few ruling the rest.
Yeah.
And it's the same with accountability. It's the self-accountability. So in a way, it is the self-leadership of taking responsibility. It's the self-accountability to work out who you are, and it is actually owning the influence and the impact. But that puts your word of giving in a not in a standalone perspective of giving away, but more in, like you said, it's be good news, not bring good news. Be good news.
Yeah.
And so the most valuable thing you can give is actually contributing who you are, and how that is expressed through adding value is the word, but it's like your brilliant mind, your brilliant ideas, your solutions that you need to unlock, and the courage to develop. So that word mastery you connected to authenticness, it's interesting because it's not the mastery of skills. It's not having all your ducks in a row and having as many silver bullets as you can get. Now it's actually acquiring the skill set that is needed to own your own life development, unfolding, express your own identity, your own creativity, so that others as yourself will flourish. So it's like giving yourself by being vulnerable in a conversation.
Yeah, and look, I think there's something that we don't talk about very much these days, but I've come to recognize it in myself, is that there's almost like two versions of me, right? There's egoic me, the me that wants to be successful in the system, right? The one that is defined by how qualified I am, how, what level I've reached, externally referenced me.
Yeah.
It is just what I call egoic me, right?
Yeah.
And then there's soul me, which is authentic me, like the me I'm here to be. And the thing is, it's very hard. Well, there's two things I've found. Number one, I can't cultivate soul me without giving something of me away to discover whether that is the me that I'm trying to give away. Does that make sense? I have to serve in order to grow in that. Whereas egoic me could just want to do more courses, become more qualified, get more badges in order to feel relatively more important than someone else. It's like egoic me has a hierarchy and a pecking order and everything's relative. And where am I? Where do I fit? Authentic me is a whole different way of discovering that, right? It's not a qualification. It's not a course you can do. And that's one of the reasons I really love, the commitment to the conversations that we have on a Friday morning, is because it's not an answer to a question. It's a discovery of truth, of recognizing, of seeing, of finding language for, of testing it out, of even finding the courage to even test out what I think might be the highest me that I can be. It's a very different way of learning.
Yeah. Oh, two things that stand out what you just mentioned is like you could talk about your soul me and your ego centered me, but then you get into that white dog black dog paradigm. Both are part of you.
Yeah.
So there is something overarching that brings the two things together. Call it a higher way of thinking, paradigm shift, or in innovation we call that the integrative mindset, where it has the pluses of both but not the minus of both. Right. And we don't do the bias for one of the other, because we know that we want to be the soul me, but we have this dopamine rush which pushes us on the ego side, and then we've got the rulers who love to tell us to die of your ego side, and that's not how it works, because you cannot sacrifice a part of yourself and then find wholeness. That's ridiculous. So it is that development in finding out what the fuller version of you is, being more than the sum, or maybe the word is different than the sum of the parts of your soul, me, and your egoistic one. At the other end, what I really hear, and I think that is what I was most impressed about from the summit, is I love to hear the progress that people made through sometimes months, sometimes years. The amount of gemstones that were just shared like it was nothing. The amount of wisdom that uh, I did a full transcript and threw it in AI and asked, "Can you give me a summary?" And I expected short lists. I got long lists of puzzle wisdom, hidden gemstones. But the big thing was the peer development. The peer development gets me to that space you were calling, like the Friday morning discussions we have of actually finding language to talk about the essence instead of finding answers to solve problems. And that perspective, the essence of who I am, who I'm called to be, where I can grow in, that gives direction of my mastery, of my maturity. That gives me opportunity to step up as a leader and call forth and lead the way in all the other things, because I know there is a group of people who don't judge me but are brutally honest in pushing me not to do a better job, but do a more authentic job in discovering who I am.
Yeah, I agree. And look, if ego me loves hierarchy and pecking orders and relative value, it's always on the hunt for the one thing that's going to make it slightly better, right?
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, it's always looking for the one thing that will make me better than, I don't know, somebody else maybe. But and you know, I'm not bashing ego, because ego is necessary, but it can only take you so far. And unless you can tune into soul me, which interestingly, right, I discovered when I wanted to know, well, what's the origin of the word soul? In ancient Hebrew or Aramaic, the word for soul is the same as the word for throat or voice. In other words, it's not authority from a point of view of just because of competency or credibility. It's about your who-ness. Who are you? And the answer to that is not out there on some list of courses you can do. The answer to that question has to be explored. It's more like a quest. It's a, yeah, quest is probably a good word that sadly many people don't ever bother to take, because they're satisfied with how far ego me has managed to take them.
Are they satisfied, or do they value comfort and convenience so high that this is too risky?
Well, as I've wrestled with this, one of the character traits of ego me is that he likes to be right and certain, even when he's not. He likes to feel like,
Guaranteed output.
yeah, predictability, certainty. You know, um, he's mostly, he seems to mostly be driven by fear or energized by fear. Don't want to get it wrong. Need to be right. even if I'm wrong, I'll find a way to say I'm right.
Yeah.
The egoic side of me is associated with fear, and the soul side of me seems to be associated with love, which I think is the opposite of fear.
Just reminds me of a conversation I had, must be more than 5 years ago, even longer maybe, but let's say it's 5 years ago. And that was a conversation about, is there a touch point between management and leadership? And the more we dig into it, we would say, well, there's nearly no touch point. And the conversation I had with, I think, yeah, his name was Eugene. He said the only touch point is in predictability. Is it predictable or unpredictable?
Yeah.
He said that's the only touch point. And after 5 years of going many iterations and many circles around it, I still think it comes back to that word, predictability.
Yeah. Have you done the risk assessment?
Well, do you mitigate risk? Well, we
Yeah.
say true leaders rise up and take risk. And we work with the word risk in strategy, and we say, well, the R is for recognize the emerging future. The I is identify the potential or the necessary change. The S is, do I step up in my ownership, my responsibility, my leadership? And the K stands for how to keep the momentum to sustain that this transformation is lasting.
Yeah. So listen, when I was sort of doing business consultancy, one of the things that I struggled with was people was generally asking the question, what do I have to do to get more sales? It was like the do to get question always. What do I have to do to get more out of my people? And if you actually know how to interrogate Google, it will tell you how many times people put those searches into Google. Like, is just
How to.
what do I have to do to get? Anyway, and I knew that wasn't enough. You had to think systemically, right? And then I knew that wasn't enough because you had to engage your people. And I knew that wasn't enough if the leader wasn't inspired by some vision. So the more I dug into it, I had the conversation with this guy who pointed me in the direction of a paper from the Center for Creative Leadership in America. And the paper basically said this: one of the problems we face today, and one of the reasons most large corporates just don't know how to evolve, is because their leaders no longer know how to think conceptually.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem is, if you don't know how to think conceptually, you're not really thinking strategically. You're just, strategy to you is just how to get from A to B without any risks. Right.
Yeah.
But because unless you can think conceptually, or another way is, unless you can visualize, unless you can imagine possibility, you can't build new. Which it's which is really interesting when you begin to understand how they say Einstein was clever. Einstein just knew how to think conceptually. Most of his discoveries came from thought experiments, from thinking conceptually about things and going, oh, that, if that's true, then this. But yeah.
Yeah, but STO, isn't it? Strategic, tactical, operational. We kill the context, because in the relationships and the interaction between people, that's where the root of all unpredictability is. So we end up with just controlling the output, and think about it as in operational procedures. What's your modus operandi? Well, but that's the same thing. Before that we went live, I just saw the header of an email pass by on my screen, and it says the future of education. And I haven't read the email, but for me that's like, okay, 2 boxes. does it talk? How do we extend operationally the old system that's not fit for purpose? Or are we going to really reinvent everything needed to find the new system that bridges the next 50 years? Because
Yeah,
systems have its place, but systems don't have a purpose. They are a mechanism to sustain something.
yeah. Look, I suspect the email goes something like this: how do we compete with the Chinese who are better at maths and science than us?
Yeah.
Well, in other words, competing must therefore mean getting more kids with better grades, which means how do we get more kids to pass more exams? But it's not how do we teach people to think more creatively and imaginatively, because that's messy, you know.
Yeah.
And I can't count it. Ego loves to count things. So if all you've got heading up these systems is egoic driven people who just want to know how to have more predictability, more certainty, be able to count things more accurately, that's not going to achieve anything.
Well, it's a bit like, how do I extend my position? How do I extend my due date before it's over? Which is all fine, if that's the end stage, if you have that perspective of life, then this is what I need to achieve. This is how I need to get all my ducks in a row. And then I start to protect it. There's a role for that, but there is definitely a bigger role ahead of us where we start to understand what is emerging to us, and if we don't focus intentionally on what is emerging to us and unfold ourselves in our future identity, reinvent our leadership, then it will, what the future adds, gives, we will miss it. It will be for someone else.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's the best definition of waste.
Well, and not only will it be for someone else or another generation, my fear would be how far this thing declines in the meantime.
Yeah.
And what was interesting for me out of the alt summit also was remembering that most movements or revolutions or whatever you want to call it, shifts in paradigm, awakening to new possibilities, generally start with conversations in coffee shops or somewhere like that, between thinkers who say, well, come on, what's really going on here? What's really possible here? What if we could imagine a new way of being? What if we could? And I think that is the challenge, because unless we can reconnect all of these systems to what they are for, which is to help people live their fullest life, then it's not really going to change, and it's not going to change by increments, of what is already. Which was another interesting theme that came up in the conversation, wasn't it? What do we mean by progress? What do we mean by this thing that there seems to be people who think that the future will be what it will be by default. We just have to work harder, just keep going. But I think I agree with you that we're at the beginning of a new creative age where something completely different is going to emerge.
Yeah.
And that's going to require us, if we're serious about recognizing that and stepping up to that, we need to be having conversations about it. And that's where I think your alt forum is really key to help people discover a different kind of leadership. And I'm really glad to be part of it.
Thank you for today, having set the time apart for for our live conversation. And I'll use this as a bridge, because we launched the Alt Forum, a place, a Q&A place, and maybe it is actually about changing the conversation, a place designed for forerunners, entrepreneurs, and game changers who are ready to explore their authentic self, reinvent their leadership, and sharpen their foresight. Because this is a time and age where leadership from the inside out will get traction and will have the impact. And like Chris, you said, movements, you don't start movements. I don't have a plan to create a movement. I think movements are recognized with hindsight, like the Renaissance. I spoke last week in a podcast with Mark where we said, but Renaissance is recognized way after those people who made it, initiated it, led it, are long gone. So movements, let's not focus on creating a movement, but just focus on creating that space where we can change the conversation in such a way that we start to get understanding, grip with a P or a B, or however you want to write it. You get grip on who you are, who you're called to be, and with who are you can run into that great adventure called life. So if anything resonated with you, just connect. There's a link in the details of the podcast. In the live feed, you see it on your screen. It's called businessrevivalist.com/connect. It's just a trigger to start the conversation and give you a little bit more specifics about the Alt Forum, that space for forerunners and entrepreneurs and game changers, forward-thinking leaders. So if there's anything that resonated with you, don't waste the trigger. It could be the life-changing event. And I mean that trigger that resonated with you right now could be the life-changing event to unlock who you are becoming, and so that you can find that place where you find fullness. So please don't waste that. Just connect, direct message Chris or me, and I love to have a conversation. So the Alt Forum is the place to start. We also talked about the peer mastermind, which is a way more intentional format, but it starts with the Alt Forum. So love to connect. Chris, thank you.
Good to talk to you.
It was a pleasure as always. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Bye-bye.
Bye.